Mussolini was even more evil than you think. In this video we will discuss the things he did to Italian women. Benito Mussolini sought to rule not just Italy but also its future. And to do this, he set his eyes on the lives of Italian women. Mussolini saw women as state instruments rather than people with personal interests, tailored to support his vision of a stronger, greater Italy. His government intervened in almost every area of their lives, defining their roles, bodies, and even their destinies. One of his most ambitious projects was the Battle for Births, which began in 1927. Mussolini felt that for Italy to become a dominating power, it needed to increase its population, more workers, troops, and people who supported his cause. His objective was staggering: increase Italy's population from 40 million to 60 million by 1950. However, this was not merely a demand for greater families. It was a campaign implemented by regulations that pressed, limited, and, in many cases, simply compelled women to become mothers, whether they wanted to or not. To ensure that his strategy succeeded, Mussolini imposed tight regulations. The government strongly encouraged big families, and in 1933, it began providing financial incentives to mothers with several children. A mother with 6 or more children may be eligible for public assistance as well as specific privileges. Large families were seen as ideal citizens and were rewarded with tax benefits, food discounts, and even preference in government employment or housing. One of the most well-known events related to this approach was a large celebration arranged by Mussolini in 1933. Thousands of mothers who had given birth to many children were invited to Rome, where they were honored and awarded medals. These medals, known as the Honor of Motherhood, were awarded in bronze, silver, or gold, depending on the number of children the lady had. Mothers with 10 or more children were honored as national heroes. However, although mothers with numerous children were rewarded, women who did not follow Mussolini's plan were penalized. He perceived such ladies as a danger to his vision. To dissuade women from deferring marriage and childbearing, he imposed a special tax on unmarried individuals. Known as the bachelor tax, it was imposed in 1927 and mostly applied to males. However, it also affected women who were single at a particular age. This fee compelled many young people to marry earlier than they would otherwise have. This levy was extremely unpopular, particularly among working-class males who couldn't afford to marry early. Many men had to postpone marriage because they couldn't sustain a family, but Mussolini's regime ignored economic reality. The strategy merely increased financial pressure on males while restricting their personal freedom. Mussolini utilized the media to propagate his views and ensure that they reached every family. Newspapers, radio shows, school textbooks, and even street signs featured statements urging women to have more children. The government produced papers saying that women with big families were happier and more satisfied, whereas those without children were lonely and depressed. Doctors were urged to inform women that having a large number of children was beneficial to their health, despite the fact that Italy's high birth rate resulted in several pregnancy-related fatalities. Hospitals were inadequately prepared, and medical attention was geared around keeping women alive during childbirth rather than promoting their general health. Many women experienced difficulties, yet there was little concern about their health. Mussolini intentionally stopped women from having authority over their own bodies. Contraception was declared illegal, and anybody caught selling or using birth control may face punishment. Abortion was likewise strictly prohibited, with doctors who performed it facing arrest and dire punishments. Women who wanted abortions frequently had to undergo risky, illegal procedures that endangered their lives. The government made great lengths to guarantee that women become pregnant as frequently as possible. There were instances where physicians would assess young ladies to see whether they were fit for delivery. Women who were judged to be healthy were often urged to marry soon so that they might begin having children. Mussolini did not feel that women should have careers. He thought that a woman's role was at home, raising children and supporting her husband, and he worked to ensure that government regulations supported this view. Mussolini's 1933 statute, which banned women's employment in government occupations, was one of his most significant efforts to limit women's labor. According to this rule, women may only hold 10% of public administration posts. This was a direct attack on educated women who had trained for positions in government agencies, schools, and other public organizations. But Mussolini did not stop there. In 1938, he extended this prohibition to private firms, making it much tougher for women to find work. Employers were urged to terminate female workers and replace them with males. Companies who obeyed this regulation were frequently rewarded by the government. Mussolini rationalized his measures by claiming that males needed work more than women, especially when the Italian economy faltered. He claimed that women should prioritize being spouses and mothers over competing with males in the workplace. These regulations disproportionately affect women in the middle class and with higher education. Many women who had trained as teachers, secretaries, or public workers were suddenly out of employment. Mussolini wanted middle-class women to stay at home, but he couldn't fully exclude women from the labor field. Italy nevertheless needed female labor, particularly in industry and farms. However, even here, women were treated unjustly. They were frequently paid less than men for performing the same tasks. Their working circumstances were far worse. Women, for example, were a sizable proportion of the labor in Italy's textile and agricultural sectors, but they had limited employment stability. Employers may dismiss them at any moment, and they had no legal recourse. In most circumstances, women worked long hours in risky settings for a fraction of the pay that their male peers received. The government also discouraged women from pursuing higher-paying careers. Women who worked in professions considered masculine, such as engineering or manufacturing, were sometimes urged to resign. Job training programs were mostly geared at men, leaving women with little opportunity to grow in their employment. Mussolini modified not only the laws, but also the way young ladies were taught. The idea was to ensure that girls understood from a young age that their primary mission in life was to become mothers and brides. Schools were altered to match Mussolini's philosophy. Girls were taught how to be good rather than disciplines such as science, math, and business. Homemakers, cooking, sewing, childcare, and housekeeping were among the topics covered in class. Textbooks were changed to reinforce these concepts. History texts celebrated big, traditional families, while literature stressed women's roles as caregivers. Even in topics like as biology, instruction centered on parenting rather than genuine scientific understanding. Outside of school, publications and newspapers influenced how women perceived themselves. Women's periodicals were brimming with articles on how to be a good wife, raise obedient children, and support their spouses. Women who worked were frequently regarded as greedy or miserable, whereas housewives were shown as content and joyous. The government even set up specific programs to prepare young women for their future duties as husbands and mothers. Mussolini's administration established the ONMI in 1937, which operated programs for young girls and mothers. These programs taught girls how to cook, clean, and care for newborns, preparing them for a life focused on family. Mussolini did not want women to have political power either. Women were absolutely barred from government jobs. They were not permitted to vote. Although some fascist women's clubs existed, they were government-controlled and propagated Mussolini's views on motherhood and family. Women who stood up against these practices were frequently silenced or disregarded. Even in social settings, women were relegated to the sidelines. Women's sports and groups were discouraged, and public areas became increasingly geared toward male pursuits. One of Mussolini's most significant attempts to restrict family life occurred in 1930, when he made divorce absolutely illegal in Italy. Divorce had previously been difficult, but Mussolini assured that once married, a couple could never legally split, regardless of the circumstances. This law had a catastrophic impact on women in violent relationships. If a woman's spouse was abusive, unfaithful, or irresponsible, she had no legal means to leave. The only choice was for spouses to live apart, but even then, women were not financially or legally protected. If a husband abandoned his wife, she couldn't force him to give support. Because women had few career possibilities, many were left in abject poverty if their marriages failed. Mussolini's regime supported this policy, arguing that divorce posed a threat to social stability. He contended that strong families produce strong citizens, and that allowing people to leave their marriages would result in moral degeneration. This was also why the state made it impossible for women to work. Mussolini wanted them to be completely reliant on their husbands. They would have no option but to remain married and raise children. Mussolini's anti-divorce and pro-marriage policies were closely matched with the Catholic Church's teachings, which had long exerted influence over Italian culture. Mussolini cemented this alliance in 1929 when he signed the Lateran Treaty with Pope Pius XI. The treaty acknowledged Vatican City as an autonomous country, granting the Pope complete power over it. It declared Catholicism the official religion of Italy, increasing the Church's control over Italian society. It also strengthened Catholic authority over family life. This includes marriage and schooling. One of the major outcomes of the Lateran under the terms of the treaty, Catholic marriage regulations became Italian law. This meant that the Church had direct influence over marriages, and because Catholicism absolutely prohibited divorce, Mussolini's prohibition on divorce grew stronger. The Church also helped Mussolini promote conventional gender norms. Priests emphasized the value of big families. Religious rites were utilized to honor women with a large number of children, and priests frequently spoke out against women seeking independence. Mussolini's relationship with the Vatican wasn't always easy, but they cooperated on marriage and family issues. For males, the requirements were far less stringent. While spouses were expected to marry, there were no serious consequences for abandoning their families or having affairs. Many rich men had mistresses, and certain government figures, like Mussolini, were known to have extramarital relationships. Women, on the other hand, suffered serious repercussions for any amorous relationship outside of marriage. Even widows experienced challenges. If a woman's spouse died, she frequently had little control over her property or financial assets. Women were discouraged from working, leaving widows with children in extremely terrible situations. Many people relied on church charity or extended family assistance, while the state did nothing to aid. Mussolini didn't merely modify the laws, he also shaped how women were perceived in society. Even fashion was influenced by Mussolini's rhetoric. The dictatorship forbade women from wearing lavish or exposing attire. Makeup was considered disloyal since it was linked to vanity and moderner women who opposed traditional values. Women were instructed to keep their appearances natural, avoiding bright lipstick and excessive eye makeup. Simple and modest attire was encouraged. Women were required to dress in sensible, traditional manner rather than imitate foreign trends. Hairstyles were kept simple, short, trendy cuts were discouraged, while longer, more traditional looks were appreciated. Despite Mussolini's severe limitations on women, many found methods to oppose his policies. Some battled in subtle, silent ways. Some refused to accept the regulations imposed on them, while others took more direct action, risking their lives to oppose fascism. One of the most popular means of resistance was the hidden use of birth control. Mussolini's battle for births attempted to push women into having big families, but many women refused to be regarded as machines for reproducing children. Even though birth control was prohibited, many women devised methods to avoid conception. Midwives and physicians assisted in the hidden distribution of contraceptive techniques. Homemade treatments and traditional herbal procedures were passed down through women. Abortion, while illegal and deadly, was frequently the only alternative for women who couldn't afford another. Many women simply refused to have children by abstaining from intercourse or relying on their limited understanding of natural birth control methods. This was their discreet way of refusing Mussolini's request for more babies, as Mussolini's power over Italy tightened. Women played an important part in underground resistance organizations. Many women engaged in clandestine networks, spreading anti-fascist propaganda, delivering covert communications, and defending those targeted by the state. Some printed and circulated illegal publications critical of Mussolini's administration. Others assisted in the hiding of political opponents, providing them with refuge and food while they were pursued by fascist authorities. Several women worked as couriers, discreetly delivering communications between rebel factions while posing as ordinary housewives or laborers. These subterranean operations were very dangerous. If women were apprehended, they may face imprisonment, torture, or even execution. Despite the hazards, thousands of Italian women joined the campaign, determined to resist Mussolini's despotism. When Italy allied with Nazi Germany in World War II, the resistance movement grew even stronger. Women were no longer simply aiding the resistance in secret, they were now actively involved in combat. Many women were partisan fighters, joining armed organizations that opposed Mussolini's forces and subsequently fighting the Nazis when Mussolini was deposed. They operated as spies, acquiring information on fascist and Nazi movements and relaying it to the resistance. Others helped transport guns and supplies to the combatants, often directly under the noses of Nazi forces. Carla Capone was one of the most recognized women in the resistance. Born in 1918, she grew up in an era when women were supposed to stay at home and follow their husbands. However, rather than obeying Mussolini's orders, she joined the anti-fascist resistance in the early. Capone became an active member of the Gruppi di Azione Patriottica, or GAP, a group that carried out assaults against Mussolini's army and then against Nazi rule in Italy. She participated in violent activities, including strikes against fascist forces in Rome. She was eventually given Italy's Gold Medal of Military Valor, the country's highest military medal, for her valor. But Capone wasn't alone. Thousands of women joined partisan formations and fought in the highlands and towns, helping to force Mussolini and the Nazis out of Italy. These women were referred to as partigiane, or female partisans, and they played an important role in freeing the country. As Mussolini's regime cracked down on political opponents and Jews, many women took significant risks to assist individuals in peril. In 1938, Mussolini enacted racist legislation that targeted Jewish residents, depriving them of their privileges and making them targets for deportation. When Nazi forces conquered Italy in 1943, Jewish families were in even greater danger. Women in the resistance played an important role in protecting Jewish families from being sent to detention camps. Some women welcomed Jewish refugees into their houses, providing them with sanctuary and assisting them in getting to safer locations. Catholic nuns and other religious ladies also assisted with the rescue attempts. Jews were hidden in churches, convents, and orphanages. Many women collaborated with underground networks to create forged identification documents so that Jewish persons may evade discovery. Without these courageous ladies, many more Jews would have been deported to Nazi extermination camps. Resisting Mussolini's rule had a high price. Many women who joined the underground movement or the armed resistance were detained, tortured, or killed. Lydia Beccaria Rolfi, a teenage schoolteacher, was discovered aiding the resistance and condemned to Ravensbrück, a Nazi death camp for women. She survived and went on to write about her experiences. Similarly, fascist soldiers seized Irma Bandiera, a resistance fighter, in 1944. She was tortured for days and refused to reveal information on her friend. She was executed. Her body was kept on display as a deterrent to others. Gina Borrellini, another female partisan, participated in conflicts and was gravely injured. Even after losing a limb, she resumed her resistance workouts. Despite the hazards, women continued to fight. They refused to remain silent, even while facing death. Mussolini was deposed in 1943, bringing an end to his dictatorship. 2 years later, in 1945, he was caught and killed by Italian resistance soldiers. After his death, Italy transformed. The new administration restored many women's rights. Italian women won the right to vote in 1946. In the decades that followed, divorce became legal again, and women gradually reclaimed their position in the labor. However, Mussolini's actions had long-term consequences. Many women had lost prospects for education and employment. The assumption that women should stay at home and raise children persisted in Italian culture even after Mussolini died. It took decades of activity and legislative changes to reverse the consequences of his control.